Hello and welcome to Digital Photo Mentor weekly live stream. This week we're going to be learning about Lightroom and processing images in Lightroom. So if you have sent your images in, you may see them on the screen here. I'm going to be selecting a few of these based on who's attending today and maybe a popular vote. So each week I am here editing a photo submitted by subscribers or followers, people who are watching the channel just like you now. And I don't have my slide on the screen, but Rob is in the chat. If you could please share a link for people on how to submit their images. Next week we'll be doing Luminar, and then the following week we'll be back to Lightroom again. So this week we are doing Lightroom. And I've got that image on the screen already. I know we have lots of regulars here. Marty, Catherine, Mark, and David. Good to see you all. Marguerite, Deb, Raymond. I've got some images of yours, Raymond. Awesome. Tornado warning in Ottawa. That's not good. Trish, welcome. I've got yours as well. You could probably see it on the screen there. And Rob has shared the link for you if you want to submit some images for next week, which will be Luminar Neo. You can still submit for the following week for Lightroom. I've still got a few left, but I'm always looking for new images. And we may be doing some more themes coming up in terms of particular styles of images. So portraits versus landscape versus maybe street photography or scenes, that kind of thing. All right. Brandon, welcome. Yes, sadly, and summer is almost over. However, it's like 32 degrees outside here in Edmonton today. And I've got my little fan on here. So hopefully myself and my computer does not melt down today. So let me get Lightroom open here. Let me see. The one that I wanted to start with, we've got some really cool images here that I thought would make some really neat fine art. I've also got some bird images. We've got one from Deb and also from Marty. So let's look at the bird images first. And I've got this one from Linton that he submitted a while ago. So we can see, looks like a loon, and he was photographed with a Nikon. You could see the exposure is 1/1000th of a second, f5.6. So he should be nice and sharp. Let's go to the develop module and have a look. So what can we see? Question for you guys that are watching live, and if you're watching this replay, put in the chat. What can you notice here about the histogram? What does that tell you? And how am I going to fix it? What slider or sliders am I going to use to fix the exposure? I'm already giving you a hint on this one based on what you see on this histogram. Okay. Before I do that, though, I'm going to pick a different color profile. So I'm going to see what we have for color here on the camera. There's not a lot of color in this scene. I can go with one of these here. I'm going to go with neutral because I'm not sure what's going to happen when we adjust the exposure. Anne says, let's see what answers we got coming up. More highlights. Mark says increase the white. Trish said highlights and whites. Raymond said highlights and shadows. Okay, so whoever said the whites was correct. I'm going to start with that. So what this histogram tells us is that the image is underexposed. Okay, so white is on the right, gray is in the middle, and black is on the left. So we can see that there's nothing from medium gray to white. That tells us that there could have been more exposure that way. Okay, so in terms of how you expose this one, Deb, what could be done in the camera, let's look at the exposure information again. Let me open this panel here. Okay, so if you're in Lightroom and you're not familiar with this panel, we spend a lot of time in the develop module, but something that I address in my Lightroom course, and we go through this in quite detail, is the library module as well, and all of the information and things that you could do here in the library module. So in here under metadata, we're looking at the EXIF. And this tells me what lens she used, the exposure, and we can also see things like exposure bias, which is not shown up here. So that's exposure compensation, whether or not the flash fired, and what exposure program she used here. So manual mode is what you were using. And what happened here is you likely, I'm guessing, okay, so Deb, you're watching this, I'm assuming. Yes. So tell me when you did this shot, when you have your little scale inside your camera, if you set your camera to 0, this is what you got, because the scene was meant to handle, or the meter in your camera is trying to make medium gray. So Rob, if you could please share the article that I just did on exposure compensation. But when you're shooting in manual like this, Deb, a scene like this, you want to kind of take one if possible. And I know it's not always possible when you have a moving target. Take one and then check the histogram, because you would have seen that it was dark, and then just punch up the exposure a little bit more. So in this case, you could have increased the ISO, right, or lowered the shutter speed, right? But in that case, you might end up with some blur, right? The issue with ISO and shooting manual is that it won't change the ISO unless you hit a target, right? So if you've told it, okay, I don't want to go under 1/2000th of a second, then it will raise the ISO, but otherwise it's not going to raise the ISO for you. So the issue here was that you needed to pay attention to the little meter. And if you were shooting on matrix metering mode, which you were, like pattern, and it took an overall view of your scene, you could shoot an aperture priority, okay, the largest aperture on your lens, which in this case is 5.6, and then set your minimum shutter speed using auto ISO, and it will crank the auto ISO up for you, right? So whoever said using the whites, okay, is correct. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to hover over the word whites, press the shift key, and double click on the word. Okay, so what that does is it pops the white slider over enough so that the white, or the farthest end of the graph, is now touching the right hand side. So basically what it does is it stretches the graph that way. No, that way. It's backwards on my screen. Okay, so it stretches the graph from the end that way. Okay, so notice I haven't touched exposure. Let me undo that. And if I go with exposure instead, and I'm trying to get it over to this side to get some white, see how far I have to go? It's almost 2 stops. So that is kind of an indication on this one, Deb, that the image is at least 1.5 stops underexposed. So definitely keep an eye on that. When we do that, when we use the exposure, it's literally affecting the midtones the most, okay? That's why I have to push it so far. So I'm going to do a combination of both. I'm going to do the shift double click, okay? And then I'm just going to use the Alt Option key to dial it back a little bit. And what that's showing me is anything that's clipping. So when I hold the Alt key, shows me anything that's clipping. And then I want to dial it down until it's not clipping. Okay, so clipping means no detail. Then I'm just going to do a gentle adjustment of exposure. See how it's just shifting the middle of the graph mostly without sending it over the top? So I'm just going to give it 1/2 stop exposure, and that's brightening up this area. Okay, so it's brightening up the parts of the image that are middle gray or middle toned. Okay. Now, if I want to darken the highlights here, okay, I'm going to actually go this way. So I'm not going to brighten the highlights. I'm going to go this way to keep some detail here in the water. Okay. Next thing I want to do is I want to crop it, because he's right in the middle of the screen. So what I'm looking at in terms of first editing this image was, the first thing I saw was that it's dark or underexposed. So I'm solving that with the white, combination of the white and the exposure slider. Okay. Now that I've got the exposure a little better, I may actually go back and see if there's a better camera profile. It looks like, well, there's a vivid one. There's not a lot of color here to begin with, right? Landscape gives it more contrast. So I'm going to stick with neutral for now. And I'm going to crop this one. So using my keyboard shortcuts, R on my keyboard is for the crop tool in Lightroom. Rob, if you could please share a link if they want to get the Lightroom keyboard shortcuts cheat sheet downloadable. It comes with the Lightroom course if you are a member of the course. And I'm going to keep the aspect ratio locked, meaning it's going to stay the same if I drag the corner. I can't change the proportions. Okay. So I'm going to come in quite a bit. I want to keep the reflection, but I want him a little bit more off-centered and more space in front of him than behind him. Okay. So when I was shooting this, if you had the ability to zoom in a bit more, And we can take a look at what lens that was again. Okay, so it looks like she's at maximum zoom here. So you're not able to zoom anymore with the lens. So a little bit of crop here. A little bit of crop here is fine. Okay. So see how he's got space in front of him now? Okay. Now I'm going to do the same with the black. So it looks like his head is fully black, but I'm just going to do a shift double click on black. And what that does is, again, it puts the graph touching the edge, and holding the Alt key down, I'm actually going to clip a little bit of the blacks because I'm going to adjust him separately from the background, right? So now the next thing is, well, I want to decide, how do I want to bring the subject out more? Okay, so he already stands out because the things that stand out in your image or in the background are things that will draw your attention also to the subject. Okay, so the 4 things are on the bottom of the screen now: brightness, sharpness. He's sharp. Now he's not bright, okay? And there's no color here, but the last one, contrast. So your eye will go to the area that's sharp with contrast, in this case, the bird. Okay, so you could do the background lighter or darker. We could go either way with this. Okay, so if I want to do a vignette, for example, I'm going to use one of my presets. So I've got some vignettes preset up. These are in my Lightroom presets that are available. And I have a few that are actually lighter edge. So see how we can go darker on the edge or lighter. So I'm just going to select one, and then I'm going to show you what it's doing. It's under the effects panel. That's where you'll find the post-crop vignette, right? Let me get back over here. Oops. So what it's done is it's increased the amount to the plus side instead of the minus side. Okay, so if we go minus, that's darkening the vignette. Plus is lightening. Right? And my trick for suggesting or the size and the position of the vignette, dial it down to 0 feather and then position it where you want. Okay, now you can't move it around in Lightroom. It's always centered. So if you want it in a different place, you'll need to do a radial filter instead, or a radial mask. So I'm just going to do something like that. Okay, so we could make a light vignette because now he stands out, right? He stands out in the picture. If we go the opposite way and darken, he stands out as well because he has the most contrast. Okay? I personally tend more towards dark vignettes as opposed to light. Okay? Now I want to try a mask. Okay, so everything we've done so far is a global edit, applies to the whole image. Now when you get up into the masking tools up here, we're going to use a mask, and I'm going to choose select subject to see if it finds the bird. Okay, fingers crossed. Yes, it did. Right, so what I want to do with him is I want to brighten the shadows on him a little bit, and you can see if I do that, it's punching up his face. I'm getting a little bit more detail in his face, and I may even just give him overall a bit more exposure. Right, I'm also going to add some texture and some clarity to him. So if I zoom in a little bit, let me do one more zoom. Let's see what that's doing. You see how we can actually see his eye now, and his feathers look a little bit whiter. Okay, I might even give him a little bit more white. Now, because I can't see if there's anything clipping here, we can press the J key, and that will give me the clipping warnings. Now I can see his feathers are clipping a little bit. So I'm just going to dial the whites back a tiny bit. And I want to make sure that I don't lower the blacks or lift the blacks so much that I don't have any black at all. Okay? I'm getting a little bit of noise on there as well because I've lifted the exposure on him. So I'm just going to do a little bit of denoise here. So these mask tools are great because I can do all of these things with one mask. Okay. Now the next cool thing, I'm going to rename this one. So just click on the 3 dots. So bird. The next cool thing is when you have a mask like this, you can actually duplicate it and invert it. Okay, so I've got the bird selected now. If I duplicate and invert it, it's going to select the opposite. Okay, and it resets all the settings for me. Okay, now I'm going to darken the water and the exposure. Now he really stands out. You see that? The other thing that I can do is, because there's not a lot of color here to begin with, we can actually add some color. So if I want the water to look a bit bluer, I can actually select a color. Let's try something, maybe a little bit of green. You know how water kind of has a green tint sometimes? I don't want to go too far because that doesn't look realistic. So the higher up I go, the more saturation it has, right? You can also see the saturation slider here, but just ever so slight sort of color. Let's see what this is doing. I'm going to call this water. If I turn this one off, right, it's just giving it a bit of color overall. Once I've done the masking, I'm going to go back to the basic panel, check the whites again, right? See if there's anything clipping, check the blacks again, and maybe even lift the exposure a tiny bit more. I find this image a little bit flat overall, so I'm going to add a little bit of clarity to it. Okay. We could also try dehaze. Dehaze tends to add contrast and black, but it goes too far, I find, a lot of times. So I'm just going to add a little bit of clarity. And then we have our before and after. Okay. Just like that. Now, while I have the water selected, we could actually blur it a little bit more as well. Okay. So one thing about texture and clarity. Okay. So these are the overall sliders here. I want to do this to extreme just to show you how this works. Okay. If I increase the texture and the clarity, it affects the entire image on these sliders here. Right. The ones at the top here, this is my water mask. Okay. If I do exactly the same minus, it's equal to 0. So if I do the whole image as plus 100 and the mask is minus 100, it zeroes it out. Okay. So if I do a full before and after, you'll notice that the only thing that's getting sharper is the bird. Okay. So I don't want to do a full 100 on 100 on both of these here. I'm just going to increase the clarity overall a little bit. Okay, now you can see that with the water clarity and texture minus, okay, I'm actually getting rid of some of these ripples and smoothing the water out. Right. So if you want the water to be smoother, right, that's great. What if we just want the front part of the water to be smooth and not the back part? I got a trick for that too. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to leave clarity and texture alone in this one. And I'm going to duplicate this mask. Now, when you just do duplicate, it does all the same settings. Okay, when I did duplicate and invert, it erased everything and set it back to 0. To do that, you just have to double click the word effect. Okay. Now that we have the water selected again, I'm going to do minus clarity and texture and sharpness. And I'm going to the extreme just so that you can see that it's really, really blurry. Okay. But I only want it on the water up to him. Okay. So we've got this selected as subject. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do intersect with a linear gradient. Okay, so what I want to do, or I could do minus here, I could do subtract here, and subtract, that's a simpler way of doing it actually, a linear gradient. Okay, so I'm going to draw the gradient from the background. Actually, I'm going to change my mind. I'm going to undo. Oh, there we go. I'm going to undo, and I'm going to subtract a radial gradient instead. Because I want to keep the middle of the picture sharp, I can't do a graduated filter on either side, but I can do a radial one like this. And I can make the image smaller so I can go off the edge. Okay. So remember, it's only affecting the water, not him. And now I'm keeping the water next to him sharper. Okay. I'm going to turn that feather down just a little bit. Okay, let me just close that and you can see what it's doing. Right? So before and after. Mark is suggesting an off-center vignette. Yeah, the one that I just did actually where I softened the water, I could actually add some darkening on that one as well. So it's just getting the water for sure. Okay, so I could actually open that one again. Okay. So you can see where it's affecting, right? It's not affecting him at all or the water around him. And I could just do a little darkening that way. How's that, Mark? Okay. Again, now I see it a little darker. I want to boost that just a bit there. Okay. Where are we? I'm going to bring my monitor a little bit because I feel like I'm going to have to run my calibrator again. Like the color added to the water, just subtle, remember, okay? So just subtle. And you could do that with overcast skies as well. It works really well when you select the sky if you don't want a grayish sky, okay? Let's try another one. Let's see who else is here. We've got Stephanie, Sheila. Oh, hey, Sheila. Marty, Raymond, and Trish, and Anne. Okay, so I've got images from all of you. Trish sent this one, and I thought this one was kind of interesting. And she says she's processed this one a few different ways, but is not really sure what to do with it. Okay, so this is the same kind of image, right? It's like this dull sort of gray day. Really interesting scene with this shipwreck with the birds, looks like cormorants sitting on top. Okay, so similar kind of idea, but where I'm going to go with this one might be very different than what I just did with the bird, right? So let's do the same thing. The exposure looks pretty good here. It's not really under or over. We can do the shift double click, and I may end up making this one black and white, so I'm not super concerned about the profile. Let's just see if we can get any color out. There is a little bit more color there to be had if we go with either Provia or Astia. So let's go with Provia, right? I can bring the blacks. So again, shift, double click, select the black. Now notice it didn't go very far. I want to go farther on the blacks than I do on the whites. So I'm holding the Alt Option key down to see the clipping. I want to clip blacks. I don't want to clip white, right? I'm not going to do clarity overall because I'm only going to apply it to certain areas. So I'm going to leave that at neutral for the overall image, right? Let's bring the highlights down. That's going to affect the sky as anticipated, okay? I want to make that sky more dramatic, okay? So it's there, but it's not very dramatic, okay? The birds are also in the middle. So let's do a crop and a straighten on this one because I don't know about you, but I can see that the horizon is crooked. So let's do the crop tool and auto. So if you click auto here, it will try and straighten for you, okay? Another way that you can do that is by choosing this little ruler, clicking it. It comes as a little sort of disconnects from the tool. And then you just have to start at one end of the horizon and put your little crosshairs right on the horizon, click and hold, and you'll get this line that you want to stretch over to the other side. Okay, the longer the line, the more accurate this will be. And then when you let go, it straightens. So about what it just did a moment ago. So now that we have it straight, I'm going to go off aspect ratio and I'm going to go custom here. Okay, so I'm going to go custom. And I want to put the birds a little bit, this whole thing a little bit more off center. So now I have a choice of, do I want to, I'm going to keep this aspect ratio for a moment. Do I want to get rid of that rock and go more that direction? Okay. This one reminds me of a shark over here. Or we could go keep the big rock and cut off more of this way. Let's just have a look. Okay, this one here actually kind of keeps us in the picture because the big rock anchors and it gives a balance to the heavy thing on the other side. Okay, so this is what's called like visual balance, right? If we crop it the other way and get rid of the big rock, let's just see if we have the same balance. Do you see what I mean? It feels a little bit off balance now because there's this heavy thing over on this side, okay? And there's nothing to balance it. So I think I like cropping the other way here, but I want to get rid of this one in the bottom. Maybe let's leave it in the corner, something like that. So now I've got an anchor in this corner and an anchor in this corner, just making it feel a little bit more balanced, okay? I'm going to boost the shadows a little bit here. So I think this one can go, usually I don't push the shadows super far, but I think this one will take a lot more pushing because it's a bit more of a fine art kind of image. So I'm going to push these sliders to the max here, okay? Now that I've got it straight, I've got a camera profile, let's do some masking because I want to really bring the drama to this sky and also bring the crunchiness out of this wreck and the water, okay? Let's see what it thinks about for select subject. See if it picks that. Okay, it's not bad, but see what happens is it's got little bits in the sky there as well. So it's not the best selection ever. Let me try sky. Okay, so that's better, right? So the sky is definitely a good selection. I want to add drama. So what can I do to add drama with the sky? Right? Well, dehaze is going to do that. And look what happens. We actually get some color coming out. And we can see when we go real extreme, you've got kind of a blob on your sensor there. So Trish, you might want to check that. It probably won't show up most times, but it looks like you've got some sort of blob or smear on your camera sensor. So check that, okay? This is why I said dehaze has to be used subtly because it goes too far really easily. So I'm going to bring it up a little bit. But if I zoom in here, right, you can see that it's actually starting to incorporate some noise and we're getting an outline around the bird because it's not a perfect selection. So again, I'm going to scale it back so that it's not quite so noticeable. Right? Then I'm going to bring the highlights down even more and I might try some clarity. So clarity is going to do the same, but not quite as far as that dehaze. Okay. Remember, we can also add black. Okay, so black's going to add some contrast. Now notice that we're getting the same halo again. So always zoom into 100% when you're doing these kinds of extreme edits, right? Because you want to make sure that you're not getting this happening. Okay, so I want to really take care that I don't go too far with this and get this little halo. Okay. Now, what I said a moment ago is we can add some color to the sky like we did to the water of the other ones, okay? Of the other bird. So let's try. Now, if we want this to be a stormy sky, right, we could make it sort of this weird, you know how the sky is sort of like this weird green color, right? Or we could make it more sort of sunset-y. Doesn't really match. I kind of like this almost greeny yellow kind of tint. Right? That's kind of cool, right? Now the water doesn't match, but we can fix that. And I'm not doing a sky replacement because the sky itself is good. Like it's interesting enough, right? We'll deal with that smudge in a little bit here. Okay, so sky, let's label that. And let's do a second mask. And now I want to do the water. And how am I going to select the water? We can try color range or we can try luminance range. So luminance range, if I draw a little box, it's probably going to select the sky or part of the sky as well, which it did. Okay. So that's okay. I expected that because now all I need to do is subtract what? Sky. Okay. So now I've subtracted the sky and I'm also going to subtract subject just in case it's picking up any of the birds. Okay. So now we've got the water fairly well selected. Again, because it managed to think that this middle part here is part of the subject. Okay, so maybe the subject is not the best way to eliminate that. I'm going to subtract a different luminance range and do the dark areas here. Okay, because I want to make sure that I've got these little bits in here in between. Now I do. Okay, so it's now selecting the water. Okay. I didn't get that white bit there, so I could actually expand my range if I want. Oops, I'm doing the wrong one here. Let's do this luminance range. There we go. So I could expand this luminance range more this direction to get a bit more of the white. Okay. So I'm trying to get as much of the water as possible. Okay. Now I'm going to add some clarity to the water. See how that brings out the waves a little bit more. And we need some color. So let's go down here. So that little X is your color box. Again, let's just keep it similar so it looks like it matches. There we go. And we'll give it a little bit of texture. See how black also increases? I'll turn on my clipping warnings. I can increase the brightness of the whites and the blacks to give the water more contrast. And I found we got a little bit too much color. I'm just going to dial that back. I may end up turning this whole thing to black and white anyways, but I like this idea. Okay. How are we doing? That looks pretty good. Now I'm going to call this water. Okay. The selection that I just did on the dark tone. Okay. So when you do luminosity range, that's a tone. I'm going to choose the boat here. Okay. And notice it picked up the rocks as well, which is fine. Okay. And this is where I want to give it lots of texture. Okay. So I really want to pick up the texture of that wreck. So I don't want to do that overall. So that's why I use the masking tools to add the texture and the clarity where I want it. All right, let's see how we're doing here. I would think they are cormorants, Brandon. Let's zoom in. I think they are. Cormorant's a very common bird here in Canada. It looks like it. Yeah. Google that one, Trish. I'm pretty sure you do have them. They're kind of everywhere. So now I need to get rid of this streak in the sky. So that's the clone tool. I'm going to use healing, opacity 100, and feather somewhere in the middle. And I want to make sure that the brush is just larger than this blob. So I'm going to draw a line. Okay. And see how it did a pretty good job. Now you can move your target and your source spot around because I'm trying to get it to match so that this line in the cloud looks like it matches properly. Okay. That's better. So definitely clean your sensor, Trish. Now I'm just going to add an edge vignette. That looks pretty good. And now we got something dark and stormy. Okay. Now there's a little bit of noise coming out in the sky, like I said, so we could do some noise reduction here. We can also go down into the sharpen panel. I've talked about this. I talk about this in the Lightroom course as well. If you go extreme on your sharpening, okay, what happens is you're actually sharpening the noise. Okay, can you see that? Let me zoom into all the way to 100%. So you're actually sharpening the noise. So you have to be really careful about sharpening. I'm just going to put these back. But if I have the sharpening, I'm just going to leave it all the way up so you can see what happens. If we use the masking slider, it takes it off of areas that are smooth. Okay, let's see how it's coming off of the sky. So now we're sharpening the other areas, but not the sky. Okay, now I'm going to bring it back down to something a little bit more reasonable. And noise reduction, okay, I can bring that up a little bit, but you can see that after I removed the sharpening from the sky using this masking slider, the noise sort of disappeared, okay? So I don't need to do too much noise reduction. There we go. Now, what I might do with this one is actually pull it into Luminar or Photoshop and add either a LUT for color or a texture overlay. Okay, so I'm going to do that in Photoshop since we're doing Lightroom and Adobe stuff today. Okay, so if you want to bring your image over to Photoshop and have it be completely non-destructive, remember to choose Edit in open as Smart Object. Okay. Then it opens that file as a raw file as a Smart Object in Photoshop, and you can get back to those edits at any time. I can then apply a filter, a LUT, a texture overlay, any of those kinds of things. Right? I could even take it to Luminar if I wanted to do Mystical or any of my favorite filters. Okay? Hopefully it's opening the file. Yep, you can see it's thinking about it. Okay, so there's the image. Okay, you can see the layer right here. And the trick with adding, if you want to add what's called a LUT or a lookup table, you can't do that in Lightroom because it requires something that you don't have here. But I got to get my terms all right. In Photoshop, okay, I can add under the adjustment tab. Okay, so make sure you have the adjustments showing. There's color lookup. Okay, so that's literally what it is. Okay, so it's a lookup table. Okay, and you can add one here. Okay, so then you have to navigate. I've added a few previously, so these are a few that sort of came with it. Let's just see what happens if I choose this one. Right. And when it adds it as an adjustment layer. And then you have all the ability that you do with layers to change blend modes and so on. Okay. So we could really dial it in, and as well as changing the opacity. Okay. Let's see. Fall colors, film stock. These are horror blue. Let's try horror blue. That's a little over the top. Okay, so changing the opacity changes the effect. I'm just using the numbers on my keyboard to change this number. See, as I change it, it goes from 30 to 80 just by pressing 3 or 5. Let's see. How about moonlight? Okay, that's not bad. You could go super dramatic on that one. Right. There's a little bit of a glow around the bird, and I think that was from one of the adjustments that I did in Lightroom, right? But that's not bad. Now, if I want to add a texture overlay, because I see this one as very dramatic, and I think a texture might look really nice on here. So I'm just going to look and see if I have one. No, these are bokehs. Hang on. All right, so these are my Cuba textures. Rob, if you could please share a link to the Cuba texture pack. Now, keep in mind that these are different colors, and you don't have to necessarily use the color of a texture that you apply. You can change the color or remove the color entirely. But I actually do have one that's got a lot of blue in it, this one here. So I'm going to drag this one directly into Photoshop and just drop it, okay? When that happens, you get these sort of what's called a bounding box to adjust the size. And they're the same size, so it fits nicely. So I'm just going to hit enter. And then, of course, you need to change the opacity. Okay, so usually for a texture, somewhere around, I find screen sometimes works, or overlay or soft light. But in this case, darken might work as well. So let's go with soft light. Right? And then it's adding even more blue. So that LUT that we did is adding blue, and so is the texture. So it's gone a little bit too far. So I can just turn the LUT off by hitting the eyeball icon. And then we can adjust the texture in terms of, do we want it this much blue, or do I want to dial the opacity down? Okay, so I can dial the opacity of the texture down or increase it, okay, like so. Let's just keep it at 100%. If I want a little bit less color, if I want a little bit less color from the texture, the trick here is to just add a black and white adjustment layer on top, and then do what's called a clip. So you want to clip these two layers together. Watch my mouse here, okay? So it's the little hand. When I hold down the Alt Option key and move my mouse between the two layers, it changes into a box with an arrow. Click it, and it now means that black and white effect only applies to the layer immediately below it, not to anything else. Okay, so now the black and white is only applying to the texture, okay? And I can dial that one down as well. So when you start working with Photoshop and these kinds of things, you have a lot of flexibility as to how you can apply these things, right? I think that's pretty cool. I like that. Looks very painterly, right? Maybe we could dial the texture down a tiny little bit. What if you want more texture, right? You can actually duplicate this layer, Command or Control J, and it will intensify. Okay, so it duplicates it with the same opacity and the same blend mode. So it basically doubled that layer. Okay, that's a little too much. But if you want that, okay, I'm just going to hit save. So remember to get back to Lightroom now. Don't do save as, just do save. It's going to save this image. And because we opened it from Lightroom, when we close, it's going to come back in as a new file. It's going to come in as a PSD because that's what I have my Lightroom preferences set up as. Okay, so there you can see there's the new file, and it is indeed a PSD. Okay, if yours are coming back in as TIFFs or something else, you just need to go to your preferences under external editing and change your preferences here. Okay, so this one up here, I don't know why it's hidden, is Photoshop, and I have mine set to PSD. Okay. Any questions? Aha, I did just do that, Mark. You're one step ahead of me. So it wasn't a PSD until I saved it and brought it back into Lightroom. Yes, Rob has been distracted today. He's cooking steaks right after this, so he's trying to prep food as well. So what do you think about that edit, Trish? I really like this sort of grunge look that we just added with the texture here. Let's compare it. Where's the other image? Let's compare it to the one without the texture and look at them together. So let's take a vote. Who likes the textured version or the non-textured version? Awesome. Marty likes the texture. I agree. It's a very nice composition and an interesting subject for sure, you know, and to capture the wreckage with the little birds on top of both pieces is great timing. Yeah. Mark votes for textured. Lynette votes for textured. Sheila textured. Ron with, or Raymond with, Ron without. Surprisingly, Stephanie likes the textured. Come on, Rob, don't be non-committal. Everybody else has a decision here. So far, everybody likes textured except Ron and Brandon. Okay, so you could go with Ron and Brandon, or no, he's going with the texture. Okay, again, this is just an idea, and I may decide, you know, I want that black and white. And here's the cool thing is once you come back to Lightroom, right, you can keep editing. So if I decide I want this one, which now has the texture on it, I could do two things. I could take it back to Lightroom or back to Photoshop, sorry, and make it black and white there, okay? Or I can literally just make it black and white here and play around with the mix, okay? So we can play with darkening the sky more, okay? See how we've got that texture? Look at that. And really go crazy with it. And adding the texture minimizes the two problems we were getting, the outline and the glow around the birds and the noise that was happening in the sky. So we've now obliterated it with the texture. Okay. You could also do partial color. Okay. So if we don't want to do full black and white, okay, we can actually leave it as color and then just come down to the HSL panel and dial some of the colors down. Okay. If we want just the brown to be stronger. If you're not sure what color, use the targeted tool. Yeah, see, that's actually green in the sky. And that's kind of cool too, you know, very, very minimal color. And I'm not usually a fan of that type of look, but here I think it really works to add to the drama. Okay. Just like that. And now we've left most of the color in this brown thing. We can even increase and see if we can get more orange and red out of the wreckage, like so. Okay. Yeah, get off the fence, Rob. Come on. Brandon says, Ron says, get off the fence. All right, so let's see how we're doing. So we've got the bird and the boat. I have time for probably one more tonight. Who is dying to have their image edited? I've got one of Marty's. I've got one from Linton. I've got Stephanie's flowers, and I have Raymond's. A couple from Raymond. I did want to discuss this one. Oops. Raymond, I wasn't sure what you were trying to achieve here. Is this shot through a Lensball or a glass sphere or something? Is that the idea behind this one? Because I'm not sure. If you want to share the article, please. We have a couple of articles on using a Lensball on the website that might help you with this one. You want to make sure that you've got an interesting subject inside the ball and that it's in focus, right? So something needs to be focused, right? All right, let's take a vote. Do we want to do another bird? Or do we want to do some flowers? Some nice images here. Some really nice images. You guys are sending in some great, great stuff here. I'd love to know which of these ones you'd like me to do next. And not that I'm not going to do the others. We'll just save them for next time, right? Some really great images here. Let's see. Ooh, you mean the one with the wreckage, David? Yeah, I think that would make a really nice canvas print because then the canvas would actually add to that texture as well. Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Brandon says the bike, the car. Raymond can wait. The old vehicle. The lake. So I got 3 votes for the car. Okay, so the car it is. All right, Anne. I don't know if Anne's still here, but you just got voted for. So we're going to go with this one. That seems to be the winner. All right. So yeah, the old car is really cool, right? What does the histogram tell us? Well, it tells us that there's definitely some bits that are overexposed and clipping, but are those things important, right? Do we need detail in the trees in the background? Probably not, right? So I'm going to start with, I'm just going to darken it overall temporarily, okay? And you'll see why I'm doing this so that I can find a color profile that looks good, right? Camera landscape is really green, so that's a little bit too green, right? Portrait brings out more of the red in the car, neutral, faithful, or standard. I mean, faithful is actually not too bad because the car looks better. If you want to compare, just select one and then move your mouse carefully so you can sort of hover back and forth. Yeah, definitely faithful. Okay, so I don't want to make the greens of the forest too green. So faithful is doing a nice job on the car. Okay. So camera profile first, and I darkened it just so that we could see the colors a little bit better. So when things are really bright like this, the colors aren't as pronounced, okay? All right, so now I am going to lower the exposure a little bit, and let's just check on the black. So I'm going to use my Alt-Option key and just slide it down until we have some clipping. And you'll notice right away, just by doing that, see how much more intense the colors are, okay? I can bring the highlights down a little bit, and actually we get rid of those highlight clippings in the background, so that's okay. And I'm just pressing the J key to check on clippings every now and then. We can lift the shadows, right? Try not to do stuff like this, right? So what happens is when people get a subject like this that's fairly contrasty, their inclination is to get rid of all of the highlights and the shadows and go crazy with the texture, right? And the saturation, right? So this just makes my eyes bleed. So don't do, what do I call it, everyone? Don't do neon puke, please. Okay. So this is clown vomit or neon puke or whatever you want to call it. Don't do that. Okay. I'm just going to reset that and start over. All right. So a little bit darken. Okay. And I want to keep the highlights in line. So how you can do that is just click on the Alt-Option key while you're pulling the slider. And I just go enough to get rid of all the clippings. Okay. Black. I do want to clip a little bit. And then I want to lift the shadows, but not too extreme. Okay, shadows are your friend. Okay, shadows and highlights provide shape to your image. So you don't want to minimize or eliminate them. You need the shadows to provide shape and texture. Okay. Now I want to crop this one a little bit as well, because technically this is the front, right? So I'm going to crop in, and I might just undo the lock here because I want to keep the height a little bit, but get rid of some of the stuff on the side. And I want to end my crop in the middle of this tree here. Okay, so I'm ending the edge with a dark subject or a dark thing as opposed to there, because now I have a bright spot on the edge of the image. Okay, so when you're cropping, keep that in mind as to what ends up on the edges. Okay, I'd like to have more space in front, but there isn't any, so I'm going to go with that. Okay, I just want to show you the difference. Okay, so see how the dark tree on the edge, it keeps your eye sort of from leaving the image. If I crop into the bright area, okay, your eye is drawn there and you leave the picture. Okay, see the difference? Subtle, but it's there. Okay, now the color. We didn't play with white balance on any of the other ones because there really wasn't a lot of color. But let's try auto here. And we have all of the presets available because it's a raw file. Okay, so notice first thing off the bat is raw auto takes away a lot of the color. So that's maybe a little too far. We could try daylight. Okay, now daylight's not bad. In this case, I usually dial the magenta down, but in this case, I probably wouldn't because there's too much green in this picture. Or we could try the eyedropper and see what happens if I put it on the truck, right? So this one increased the magenta a lot because, like I said, there's a lot of green here and it's trying to eliminate it. So what the eyedropper and auto are trying to do is neutralize the picture. Okay, so this is actually a good starting point. I'm going to give it a little bit more warmth, but I like all that green removed because see how when there's more green, the car is lost. When we add more magenta going this way, the car stands out more. Okay, so the green is minimized. Okay, so white balance will affect your colors as well. Okay. I'm going to do a little bit of clarity overall, but we're going to give more to the truck. Okay. And now I want to do an edge vignette. Now I'd like to do one that's fairly strong, but I don't want to get this front edge here. So instead of doing a vignette, I'm just going to do a low vignette using the effects panel. Okay, so that was one of my presets. Then I'm going to use two things. I'm going to use linear gradients in combination with each other. So I'm going to add a linear gradient in from the edge. Okay. And I'm going to bring the highlights down. And then I'm going to add a second one from the top. Okay. So see how I'm darkening both the top and the left side at the same time in terms of the highlights. Okay. Now I could also go exposure and bring that down even more. Okay. So I'm just going to call this left and top edges. And this is great with the new masking tools in Lightroom that I came out with a few months ago, because previously you'd have to do one and then copy that one and move it over here. Now you can literally link them sort of so that they are doing together these adjustments. Okay. Now I'm going to see what select subject does and see if it picks out the car. Nope. Okay, so it's got part of it. Do you see why Lightroom is struggling with that? It's struggling because there's a lot of texture everywhere. Bye, Mark. We'll see you next time. Right? It would have been cool if the tree was growing out the sunroof. I don't think it's supposed to be a sunroof, but yes. Okay, so it's having trouble because of the texture here. I'm just going to have a cough drop. My tickle's back. All right, So I'm going to undo that. Sorry about that. Okay. So let's try it again. Now, I'm not going to be able to get a decent selection with either luminance range, because it's going to select if I do the dark areas, or color range. It's going to pick the ground as well. So I don't think we're going to get a good selection of the car. So I'm going to do a radial gradient. Try to get most of it. Something like that. And then I'm just going to add to it with a brush. And it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just trying to get most of the car. About like that. Oh, I'm crying. Okay, now that I've got the car, I can brighten it a little bit and go crazy with the texture and the clarity. Let's keep the blacks. Okay, note that when I brighten, I'm losing the contrast, right? So I'm going to actually increase the whites and the blacks on the car, okay, as well as exposure, okay? Because I want to keep it contrasty. So let's see what that's doing. Turn it off or turn it on. Okay, so see how that's punching that up? So a little bit of exposure and whites. Okay. Now that I've got the car selected, though, I can do duplicate and invert. Okay, so I did all the work. You can see that my mask wasn't perfect, obviously, so I can just subtract from it and paint the bits out that I don't want to get. Okay, so now we want to do the background, right? And notice how I missed this little spot in the window here. So let's just paint that in. There we go. Now this time, I want to lower the texture and the clarity a little bit. Because remember, I increased it overall. If I look down here under, oh, I got my basic panel closed. I've got plus 17 clarity. Okay, so I could go minus 17, which will actually bring me back to 0 on everything else. Okay, but I'm going to take the texture down and the contrast down and the highlights. Okay, so everything is happening on the background. Okay. So by lowering the sharpness levels, okay, we're going to add more attention to the car. Okay, so sharpness, not so much, because now it looks blurry. That looks ridiculous. Okay, so be very careful that you don't go overboard, right, with things like that. That actually looks good on the background over here. Okay, one of the as a side note, one of the things they announced for Luminar Neo that will be coming in one of the new extensions is background removal for any object. Okay, so something like this, we can actually remove the background or select the background and apply it something separate to the background, right? Like portrait background removal in Luminar Neo. All right, how are you doing on this one? I find that the color is actually overwhelming a little bit of the car. So I either want to go black and white on this one, or let's dial down the brightness of some of the greens as well as the color. Okay, so in the HSL panel, right, as David pointed out, if I change it to color, I will actually be able to choose one of the colors. Thanks for that, David, which I did not cover in the Lightroom course, so my apologies. I generally always use it in this form, okay, but you can go color by color. So green, if I want to affect the greens, I can dial the saturation down, the brightness down, and you can see what that's doing. And I can even affect the hue, so I can make it a little bit more yellow. Now the thing with foliage is there's generally a lot of yellow as well. See that? And again, this is one thing that bugs me about Lightroom is that I cannot use this tool masked. I can't mask it, and it affects the truck equally. So I can't say brush this off the truck, okay, because it doesn't work. So now if we start to lower the saturation on the green and the yellow, look what happens to the truck. Okay. I'm just going to go back to HSL, which is my favorite. Okay. Now I can increase the luminance of orange. You can see that's affecting the ground and the truck. Red is the grill. And if I want more color in the truck, we can do that as well. Okay. I kind of like the idea of it being almost monochromatic, but not quite. Okay. Now, if we want to add a bit more antique look to it, okay, without going to Photoshop or anything else, I'm going to dial the saturation overall down to about -30 or so, just under the basic panel. And then I'm going to use the color grading tool, select the shadows, and then I'm going to select an orangey yellow kind of hue and add some saturation there. So what that's going to do, maybe more yellow, is make more of like a sepia tone, right? So if I go back here to basic, that's the tone we're getting from the color grading, okay? So if I bring the saturation almost down, let's go -50, we just have a hint of color with this brown base, okay? So there's the before and after. How's that? Yes, my dad grew up on a farm, Brendan, just east of Edmonton, and so I definitely know about trees inside cars. Yes. This one might be nice for adding a texture or a bokeh as well. Okay, so again, we could take this to Photoshop or to Luminar. I find the trees and stuff in the background are fairly busy, so we could blur them a bit more. Now, if I wanted to do that here in Lightroom, okay, again, how are we going to select that? It's tricky because there isn't a good selection of the subject. Lightroom can't distinguish. So let's take it to Photoshop and see if we can do anything better. Oops, hang on. Now I've done it. Now I'm opening all 4 of them. My bad. There we go. I think it's trying to open all 4 images, so give me a second here. Oh, okay. There we go. All right. Lion. Sorry, my Photoshop is acting strange. Let me just get out of here. And let's just pick the truck. Now let's try one at a time. There we go. Do you know what my clue was there? That it was trying to open multiple images? Because when I right-clicked it and chose Edit In, these were not grayed out. Okay, so you have to have more than one image selected to get these options. So that was my signal that I had accidentally tried to open all 4 of them. Okay, now we have the truck open in Photoshop. So let's try to make a selection here. If I use any of the selection tools, a marquee or anything, you can get this thing here, and then you can just choose select subject. Okay, now let's see if Photoshop does any better job. No. Okay, so again, it's having a hard time selecting. And I think no matter what tool you use, you're going to have a hard time. Okay, so I could try the quick selection, right? Whereas I'm just drawing around the subject itself, and it's having a hard time as well. So this one would be really hard to isolate the subject against the background, right? So instead of that, let's just see what we can do by adding perhaps a bokeh. So let me just see if there's one that's got some small yellow, maybe bokehs. Again, keep in mind that we can change the color of this. So even if it's not the right color, that one might be interesting. We can change the color in Photoshop completely. I'm just looking for one that might be kind of interesting. That one might work. Okay, so I'm going to drag this one. Again, when you drag and drop an image into Photoshop, okay, it places it. You see this one doesn't fit, so I'm just going to enlarge it a little bit. I can stretch it too if I want to just make it fit that way. That's actually not a bad idea. Okay, it doesn't matter what size the bokehs are. I can just squish them a little bit. Okay, so now I've got fitting. And we just need a blend mode. So I'm going to try lighten blend mode. Screen. Now, if you want to rotate one layer and not the other, okay, you can't use canvas rotate or you can't use image rotate. That will rotate everything, including the truck. If you want to rotate the top layer, you have to use transform rotate. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to rotate 180 degrees. I want to get some of these bokehs up in the top. Okay, that's not bad. That's not bad. Let me try it again. So image. Now I have to resize it. That's okay. So I rotated it, and now it just doesn't fit. So I have to fit it the right way. So when you do free transform, you can literally put the bokeh wherever you want. And let me just say if I put it here and then just paint some into the background. Because I literally just want some coming from the trees. Not anywhere else. Let me just straighten that up. There we go. So then I just have to add a mask to it. So I'm going to mask it. And then I'm going to paint it out using black and a large brush. I'm going to paint it out of everywhere except where I want it to apply. So I want to make sure that the car doesn't have any over top of it. Like so. Right? Now I can just lower the opacity of that a little bit. And we have some bokeh in the background. Right? Again, if it's too yellow, we can use that color adjustment or black and white adjustment, fade it out a little bit, right? Because it is a little bit too yellow. So I'll just do the black and white and then just lower the opacity of that layer. So it matches the color of the truck a little better. Okay? Now, if I want to do it again, I could duplicate this layer and put it in a different place, or I could apply a different bokeh and put them over here. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to save and come back to Lightroom. All right. I did not read what Vanelli said on Twitter today. Neo and Topaz were equal. I have been doing some tests on that, Sheila. I have been testing the new noiseless extension with Luminar Neo, and it is doing a really good job. I think this got some ways to go yet, but I think that it's going to be on par with Topaz for sure. I'm not a DxO fan or user myself, and I haven't used On One either. On One's noiseless or no noise or whatever it's called is actually really good as well. But my thing is that, find some tools that work for you and use the best tools for the job that work for you in your workflow, right? So right now I'm using Lightroom and Photoshop. I also use Luminar. I also use Topaz Sharpen or Denoise. But in all honesty, if Neo, noiseless, and their sharpening can be equal to Topaz, I will probably drop Topaz from my workflow. Okay, it's just one more thing that I don't need then. Awesome. I'd love to see what you did with this one, Anne. So share in the group for just the DPM group. I'd love to see what you did. No, the Neo is released. The no noise or noiseless is what it's called. AI was released today, but it's one of the extensions. Okay, so unless you've bought the extension pack or are on now the monthly subscription, you will not have that one. Okay. For those of you that are interested, I can show you that real quick because I know people are asking about it. You can use the noiseless as a plugin, Luminar as a plugin for Lightroom. So you can take it from Lightroom into Luminar and apply noiseless. Here's Luminar Neo, and you can see the HDR merge is here. HDR merge cannot be used as a plugin. Okay? It is only for the standalone because it needs multiple images, and you can't take multiple images into a separate plugin, okay, only to Photoshop. But if you go in here, for example, on the testing that I was doing, okay, so here's the noiseless testing I was doing, okay, actually let me use this one. So this one here was shot at 25,000 ISO by mistake, and I ran it through both Topaz and the new noiseless. And where you'll find that is here under extensions. Okay, if you don't have it, you click on the puzzle piece and you'll get this coming out, and you'll see that anything that if you've paid for it, okay, you can just install it and it will show up. If you haven't paid for it, you would have to purchase the extension pack, and then you would get all of them. So then you would get upscale, which allows you to enlarge your pictures more. So you can take like a phone image and make it bigger, or a JPEG, and then AI background removal that I was just talking about. Right? So then if you could share a link, Rob, for just our Luminar Neo link. I'm going to be doing a video and talking about the extensions shortly. There is some price confusion, and I don't want to go too much off topic because we're doing Lightroom today. But if you want to drop our Luminar Neo link into the chat for everybody, if they want to check it out. So if you want to have noiseless, you do need to have the extension. Okay? So just to head back here to Lightroom, I'm going to call it a night there. Let me just see if I can find my slide for you. Give me 1 second. So just a reminder to please submit your photos. Where is my screen that says that? Apparently I don't have that. I don't have one with a link on it, Rob. I'm going to have to do it this way. Let's see. Sorry, I don't have my slide with the link on it. If you could just put the link in the chat, it's digitalphotomentor.com/live to submit your images. And next week we'll be doing Luminar Neo. So I am going to hang on to yours, Marty. I did find it interesting that the images that you sent of the sandhill cranes, I noticed that you called it a cult. Is that what the baby crane is called? I had no idea that it was called a cult. And look at the size of those legs. Holy cow. Thanks, Trish. Okay. I want to see your edit on that one as well as Anne's. And I'd love to see what you do with the loon, Deb. Yeah, I kind of never know where I'm going to go with the image, but that's what struck me as to how to bring the loon out. Again, it's always about how to bring the subject out in the picture, right? Yes, these are sand hills. We saw whooping cranes, Rob. We went and saw the whooping cranes. Yeah, they're a little bit more rare. So I am cooking in my office here, and Rob literally has to start cooking. So thanks everybody for joining tonight. And I hope you picked up a few tips with Lightroom and got some ideas as to how to apply these same techniques to your images. Thanks, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next week.